Hi, Sayer G here, and so grateful to be on a call with Tom Cowan, who is the author of a number of books that are out right now that are extremely impactful and have really opened my eyes to, the very topic I have a book out on, which is the new biology and its relevance to health and wellness. Several of the books that I would love for you to take a look at are Cancer and the New Biology of Water, which interestingly, I also discuss in my book. So there's definitely something in the zeitgeist here. And then we have Human Heart, Cosmic Heart, which is a book several of my colleagues and friends brought to my awareness, including Kelly, who is a huge advocate of your work and has been deeply impacted by it. And then, of course, Vaccines, Autoimmunity, and the Changing Nature of Childhood Illness, which is such a wonderful book. I really encourage everyone to take a look at it. And we're here today just to have a relatively informal discussion about some of the things that are really pressing. Clearly, we are all facing what is being described as a pandemic by what is to believe to be an inexorably lethal viral vector. And so I think organically, both Tom and I have been reflecting on whether germ theory, as classically conceived and promulgated throughout the mainstream media, is as valid as we are led to believe. Basically, health policy is being drafted based on this concept. And so I know that we've had some preliminary discussion, but we just would love to have a deeper sort of exploration of the topic, which I think would help people to maybe not be as fearful and give them the ability to just think more critically about what's happening. So I'll just sort of pass it to you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, there's a whole lot of places you could start here, but one of the places I might start is I have been a student of Rudolf Steiner, the guy who started Waldorf schools and anthroposophical medicine and biodynamics and a bunch of other things. And as I like to say, those were his hobbies. Those weren't his profession. He was a Goethean scholar. And in a sense, all three of those books you mentioned were essentially, I took a quote from Rudolf Steiner and tried to figure out what he meant by that. And I often describe it as knowing Rudolf Steiner is like having the answers to the test, but you don't know how he got there. But you sort of know where you should be going. So the central theme of my heart book was Steiner saying that in order for humanity to evolve in the right way, we have to understand that the heart is not a pump. And when you read that, you think something like, what the hell? Everybody knows the heart is a pump. And even if it isn't a pump, what's different? Why should that make a difference for the evolution of humanity? So it took me 20 some years to sort of figure that out. And then when you see what the heart, why it's like laughable that it's not a pump and what it does, and that, for instance, what the heart does is it stops the blood, and I don't want to get into the whole why the blood moves, but it stops the blood, converts it into a vortex, and then sends the blood on a path to the rest of the body. And you compare that with what the Sufis say about the heart, which is there's a moment when the heart stops, and that's when God enters the human being, and that gives the human being spirit. So if you think about that, so the heart stops the blood, God or the, spiritual world enters through this vortex, which is created in the heart. And that's how spirit interfaces with matter always. It changes everything. It changes how you see the world. And if it changes how you see the world, apparently, at least according to Steiner, that has everything to do with the evolution of humanity. And so, a lot of people, when they hear this, say they want me to say, no, the heart is a pump, but it's also a spiritual organ, or it's a neuroendocrine system, or it's a this or a that. And that misses the whole point.
Mm.
It's not a pump.
Yes.
And if you think it is, you miss the whole story. Now, then what's the relevance to this? Steiner was asked in 1918, after the, or during, or sometime around the Spanish flu pandemic, right, that killed millions of people. He said, what is this all about? And he said, apparently, I mean, I wasn't there, but he said, viruses are excretions of a poisoned cell. And they're not causing anything. It's complicated, and we can talk about that. But it's as if, and I like to talk in analogies, it's if the cell is pooping out poison. Now, for one thing, it's also, that tells you it's not necessarily good to eat another person's pooped poison, right? So that may not be a good idea, but that is not really, that's why it sort of looks like it's contagious. It's one of the ways you can get poison. And interestingly, he tried to demonstrate that. He had never had smallpox, and he said, smallpox, the poison is fear. And so I will recognize when I have eradicated fear from my being. Once that happens, I can go and help care for people with smallpox. Because if I don't have fear, which apparently, I mean, I wouldn't know how to do that myself, but Steiner apparently did.
Wow.
He could see in himself when there was no focus of fear.
Right.
And then he went and helped people with smallpox who never got sick. It's interesting. That's exactly what Florence Nightingale said. She said, yeah, I was never scared, and so I could go in there and I never got sick.
Well, this is such a profound way of understanding, too, sort of the spiritual substrate of what we mean by contagion, which, etymologically does connect to just contact. It's touching, actually. Yeah. So this notion of social distancing, which is a way of really instituting fear, which is othering and separation and sort of devolving to the Cartesian Newtonian body that we believe is real in the West, versus contact, love, connection. And so obviously the psychogenicity of this situation is what is of greatest concern to me, insofar as I believe that one could relatively practically implode just through fear. The immune system specifically, we know about downregulation of the immune response and upregulation of cortisol, all the things that happen with fight or flight. But I do think that it's so helpful to know that there is this sort of almost poetic, but not in a non-evidenced way, body of work that speaks to how to navigate this moment in time when it comes to the fear out there.
And the thing that's so interesting to me about this too is, so in other words, if you just take it at face value, because the whole thing with Steiner is again, so that he gives his comment, he doesn't explain it. He didn't know anything about viruses, he wasn't a biologist. Nobody knew anything about viruses really then. And then you compare that to what we know today about viruses. So in other words, what happens is there's a piece of DNA or RNA that's degenerated essentially in the cell, and then it buds out through our cell membranes, taking pieces of the cell membranes. That's sort of classic viral theory. And then it goes out into the world where it has to land on another living being in order to keep that cycle going. That's pretty close to the cell was poisoned, the DNA deteriorates, or the cellular material deteriorates. I have a personal theory that the cell is basically run by the structured water in the cell. That's the new biology to me. So when you get an insult to this structured water, it deteriorates the contents of the cell, and the cell has to try to get rid of it. Because if you keep this poison in the cell, that interferes with the structuring of the water. That's our crystalline nature, which acts like a radio. And
Mhm.
so now you have an out of tune radio, and you can't do anything properly. You can't think properly, you can't feel properly, you can't run your biochemistry, whatever that is. And so it's like I tell people, it's like you have a poison grape in your jello.
Mhm.
So classically what you do is you heat the jello to make the grape run out, and then you snot it out,
Wow.
and you get rid of it. And that's exactly what happens. And we call it a virus.
Well, there's definitely, I feel like a good body of literature now establishing, right, what you're saying insofar as exosomes are these virus-like particles that bud out of the plasma membrane, just like virion particles do. And in fact, in 2015, the first study I've ever seen, and it identified itself as the first study in this domain on the virion architecture of influenza, showed that through mass spectrometry, the influenza virion particles were indistinguishable from exosomes, which are natural microvesicles produced by the cell. And that when they did the proteome and lipiome analysis, they found that a good portion of what a viral particle is identical to the host cell structure. So if it was avian or human, it was a completely different particle, which obviously when it comes to immunogenicity, antigenicity, the fact that they're growing these flu vaccines in insect bodies and eggs, it's completely not even evaluated for safety. Or, so the point being that what you're saying is very fascinating to me, because actually that would be very consistent with what I understand exosomes do. Now, exosomes do also express through healthy tissue and communicate messages to neighboring cells that can be regenerative. So there are cases, so there are definitely examples of this going both ways. But what you're saying, I think, radicalizes or actually really generally undermines classical, germ theory when it comes to viruses and infection.
Right. It's not coming from outside, although, as you say, it gets complicated. And so these exosomes, essentially they're messages from your cell to other cells, other tissue, maybe other people, maybe even other species, maybe who knows.
Yeah.
And so that's why there could be a message from one 4-year-old to another, transmitted through this so-called exosome that says it's time for you to clean out your water body.
Absolutely. That's the xenohermetic hypothesis, right? Like one poisoned individual sending off these messages, infectious particles, communicating resilience programs to their neighbor because they're probably exposed to the same environmental toxicants, non-native EMF.
Right.
So that's a survival of the species level validation of germ theory, but through a totally different lens where it's actually conferring survival advantage, which is ultimately what I think the virome shows us in the hygiene hypothesis, which is we need exposure to so-called benign viral vectors in order to confer, survival advantage.
Right. I mean, trees do it. They send signals to their other trees saying somebody's spraying or somebody's, there's danger or there's bugs. And these are sort of intracellular contents that bud out, look like microbes if you don't know the difference. I mean, you can't tell the difference. And they signal their fellow trees to do something. And, if there was a way to sterilize us, we would die. I mean, and that's a weird thing to say, but it wasn't so long ago in medicine. I mean, people give doctors and the medical system this incredible pass, but 50 years ago, right before I was becoming a doctor, and even to the time I was in medical school, they were telling us we should sterilize our patient's gut so that they wouldn't get sick. I mean, this is 40 years ago. This isn't like 1820. And so we did. We put them in wards and you give them chloramphenicol and antibiotics. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we never were successful at sterilizing them. And now that would be laughable. But I don't know how many times you have to do. Now they try to sterilize people's virome, even though there's millions of these viral particles everywhere in your body. A, it's not possible, and B, thank God it's not possible,
Right.
because we wouldn't survive it.
No, I think that's really important. This morning I was thinking to myself, there's so much fear around infection, exposure to viruses, but we would literally die the moment you take the viruses out of our body.
Yes.
Right? 9 to 11% of the hard-coded protein coding genes in the human genome are retroviral in origin, which is supposed to be the most scary of all viruses.
Right.
And then categories of viruses. And then you have the fact that there's an order of magnitude more viruses by number than bacteria in the microbiome, which means fundamentally we're more viral than anything else, actually.
Yes.
So it's pretty absurd.
It's all a reflection of our general alienation from ourselves. We don't trust ourselves. We don't believe ourselves. We believe that people have to tell us what to eat, what to breathe, what to drink, how to live, how to put something over your face so you don't sneeze, who to be in contact with. I mean, it's nuts. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I had a conversation with Charles Eisenstein recently on this topic, and I was a student of Foucault, and he talked about biopolitics. And what I'm seeing with the unfolding of this narrative, the one narrative that rules them all, basically, which is that some novel form of the common cold virus is so deadly that it requires we invoke military powers, not just among states, but on a global level to supervene and preempt all sovereign states' rights, is really remarkable. I mean, it's really a poorly written, B Hollywood film. But, what I'm seeing is it's really more obviously about control than it is about anything else. And so what you're saying is really profound, is that the individual is a frightening concept to anyone that would want to control large numbers of people. And, I think you can speak to this, of course. The Steinerian view, I guess, is some kind of radical sovereignty or respect for one's resiliency. I would love to know more from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could put that in a nutshell.
Okay.
I think also we probably should talk about the current situation right now with regard also to testing, because I think that might help people to really understand. So if you're interested in going there, that might.
I would love it, because for me, it's so clear that there has never been, from moment one, a true identification, characterization of the virus, nor has the postulates been in any way obeyed, right? That you isolate from number of cases the, quote, culprit virus that ostensibly would, exposure would equate to infection and disease, and then go ahead and take that particle, if you can find it, and then expose animals and try to reproduce the disease. It's not been done. So when they're talking about testing and knowing that PCR can pick up RNA levels but doesn't have specificity, there's just no way that the testing could actually do anything but generate a false positive. So, right? So is that, you've come to the similar conclusion?
Yeah, maybe I could flesh this out for people, because I think it might help. At least this is my understanding. I'm not saying it's 100% correct, but the first, is that all right if I go into it?
Oh, I'd love that.
The first time I started questioning this, I graduated medical school in 1984. And I've talked to other doctors who are similar age, and we sort of laughed that the only thing we knew about immunology then was if you have antibodies, you're immune, right? The way I would put that is, if you have German measles when you're a child, you'll always have antibodies the rest of your life to German measles. German measles, if you get it as an adult, it can cause arthritis. But if you have somebody coming in at age 60 and they say, Tom, I got, my knees are really hurting. I think I have arthritis. It may be caused by German measles. And you say, do you have German measles symptoms? No, but I did when I was a child. So now, okay, I'm going to test to see if this arthritis is caused by German measles. So I do an antibody test, and the antibody is positive because he had German measles as a child. You do not tell him you have German measles, that's why you have arthritis. The antibody test means you're immune. You don't have German measles. So in 1984, there I am walking down the street, and there's this AIDS epidemic, and they announced they found an antibody to an HIV virus that means that's the cause of the disease. And I remember turning to my friend and saying, who changed the rules? I mean, I spent 4 years learning that if you have antibodies, you're immune.
Yes.
And now they're telling me that means they have a disease. So that was the first time I thought, I don't know, something weird here. But now if you put this in today's context, if you have a disease like meningococcal meningitis, it's, quote, caused by a bacteria. Now, everybody with that has the same symptoms. They have a high fever, they're really sick, and they have a rash. Everybody with that, if you culture their blood, they grow out this bacteria. And nobody who is well, like you or me, will grow out meningococcal in their blood. So, and then if you give meningococcus, like you say, to an animal, they'll get sick. So there you have 100% correlation. You have a very specific set of symptoms. Every single one of those people has a bacteria growing in their blood. Nobody who isn't sick has that bacteria. And actually you can transmit that bacteria. So my conclusion to that is not good to have meningococcus in your blood. Now, in that situation, you can find a piece of meningococcus and if you don't have to do the whole culturing thing, because if you find something that's only from meningococcus, you can use that as a surrogate marker.
Right.
And that will tell you in a short way that you've been exposed. Now, here's another way to explain that. I was thinking of this last night. Let's say you want to find out how many feet there are, like walking feet, like at the end of your legs in Florida, right? So you can go through the whole state and count everybody's feet. And there's 3,000 feet or whatever. Now you want to know how many, so then you say, okay, I don't want to count everybody's feet. So I'm going to say every person who has a foot has a shoe. And every shoe has a shoelace. So I'm not going to count the feet. I'm going to count the shoelaces because that's easier. Yeah. And that's going to tell me how many feet there are. And that's true, except some people have feet, but they don't have shoes. And some people have feet, but they have 3 pairs of shoes. And some shoes don't have shoelaces. So in that situation, you cannot use the shoelace argument to say how many people have feet or how many feet there are. And the guy who invented the test they're using with coronavirus, called a RT-PCR test, said, unless you have a gold standard like the meningococcus, you cannot use this for diagnostic purposes. It's a surrogate test.
Yes.
But the people who have, quote, coronavirus, they have a fever and a cough. So that could be anything.
Yes.
They haven't isolated the virus. And some of the people who have fever and a cough have a virus. Some of the people who have the virus have nothing. And so you can't make any prediction as to whether looking for a piece that's supposedly unique to the virus has any comment on whether they're actually sick from that. But the really scary part of this is the way the test is done. They take a piece that's supposedly unique to that virus and they accentuate it through cycles. 20 cycles, 40 cycles, because they can't find it just with one.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get it up to 60 cycles, you find it with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not unique to that virus.
No.
So, but if you do it 35 cycles,
right.
then you don't find it with anybody. So you can actually, by choosing the number of cycles,
yes.
you can choose how many people will test positive.
Right, and would you agree that even if you find the virus present in any human or any human with a set of symptoms like fever or respiratory distress, it doesn't prove causality? That
no, it could be an excretion of the cell.
Right, there could be excretion of the cell. There's an infinite number of factors that go into producing a symptom in a specific individual. So this whole model is really absurd on a really basic level.
Right.
Right.
And when you do that, and when you don't know whether it's the causative agent, or maybe there is no such thing in that context as a causative agent, maybe it's just a message, you can't use a surrogate marker in that case. Yes. And the problem then, if the false positive rate, if you do 40 cycles, is 1%, and you go test 20 million people, next thing you know, you have 200,000 people test positive, and you've got an epidemic.
Right. Well, what David Crow did in his recent article on Is Coronavirus 19 Real is show that originally in China, they were using criteria such as possible exposure to someone who had been diagnosed with the infection as a way to confirm a case. But when they started quarantining and there weren't more cases to associate with, the numbers just went down to, just basically dropped off the cliff. So it's all been through, just completely non-evidence-based criteria that they've been identifying, and the virome and metagenomic studies of just the human guts and even the blood are showing that many of these deadly viruses, so to speak, like flu and coronavirus and herpes viruses, are actually naturally present. They're part of our fundamental makeup, and therefore this concept. I was going to write this article about how, should we be concerned about a weaponized germ? Because I think there's legitimate history to show that yes, there are these secure facilities that ostensibly to protect against biowarfare have developed these strains. But I think it's more weaponized germ theory that we are most concerned about as a geopolitical control system, because of what we're seeing already with forced quarantines. I mean, we're looking at now Spain and France and Italy, and potentially soon the US will be on house arrest. With the National Guard outside with guns. And that's really something that I think people need to understand, that this isn't just an academic discussion. Actually, when you really look down into this, like we are doing with these testing methodologies, there's very little evidence there at all that they work.
Yeah, and you can manipulate the numbers to get more false positives, and then you have an epidemic, and then you can give people a vaccine, and then you can lower the numbers and then see you got rid of the epidemic. And all you did was change the number of cycles that you went through, and you'll change the numbers.
Absolutely.
When I explain this to people, at least my view, I try to give people an imagination of this. And the two that I came up with is, because we're talking about, there are people who are getting sick, and they do have degenerative cells, right? Their cells are degenerating, and they're showing more DNA than they probably should, pooping out of their cells, right? So the question then is, what's poisoning them? And the way I think of this, or try to get people to see it, it's like if you were a world famous dolphin doctor, and you go to the Arctic Circle, and they've been healthy, happy dolphins thousands of years, and then all of a sudden there's some dolphins that are dying. And I'll tell people, you have one question to ask them. And what would that be? And I give you a multiple choice. One, do these dolphins have a genetic problem? Two, do they have a virus? Three, excuse my French, did somebody put some shit in the water?
Yes. Mm.
And it's always number three.
Yeah.
Somebody poisoned the water, the dolphins get sick, they express these genetic changes and poop out viruses.
Yes.
And that was the problem. You know, when I was growing up, right outside my house, there's this wetland and this bunch of frogs in there, and they made a racket, and I couldn't sleep.
A racket.
They drove me crazy. Around 8 or 10, all the frogs went away. Again, was it because there's a genetic problem in the frogs? Do they have a virus? Or did somebody put some DDT in the water, which is exactly what happened, and it killed the frogs?
Well, this is such an important point you're making, because when you look at, for example, conventional, standard of care for things like influenza, they're using Tamiflu, which is a chemical that has profound iatrogenic consequences, many of which overlap with cardiorespiratory failure, which is primary, diagnosis of death from this, quote, type of viral exposure. So what you're looking at is, with the introduction now, fast tracking and approval of HIV drugs for this pandemic, is we're going to start to see that the poisoning they lay on top of an original chronic poisoning is going to be associated with a invisible germ called coronavirus. So it's
right.
We're going to see this potential
poisoned, and then they die, and who knows if it's because they were sick or because they got poisoned twice.
Yeah, and then I think also when you have these scary Ebola-like outfits and you have this theater, this political theater, we also have the bone pointing concept, which is like a shaman in some, ancient culture pointing a bone at a member of the tribe and saying, you'll die tomorrow, you're cursed. And the person believes them and they die. And so we're seeing that, I think, on a mass scale. In fact, some of the people that we know in this space are getting upset at individuals like myself who do not believe that the threat is as severe as CNN says, or the CDC or the WHO. And they're starting to attack individuals who aren't afraid, because so it's almost like there's a dehumanization process at play that is more concerning than any virus would ever be.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, a lot of this is speculation because we don't know. At least I don't know. But I have a feeling, based on my understanding of the history of flu pandemics, that they're all associated with an increase in electrification of the Earth. And there's something about a new electromagnetic field exposure that actually deteriorates the DNA and causes this excessive budding, which we call viruses. And that is actually a big problem.
Wow.
Like, we have a problem.
Yes.
And we see people who are deteriorated, and they started it in Wuhan and on this cruise ship.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this story was partly a kind of, it's a little bit like the Patsy thing.
Mm.
We know this is going to happen. We know that whenever we roll out radio waves and radar and satellites in the Van Allen belt, there's a flu epidemic. It's not a viral flu. It's a poisoning of the DNA. By the way, exactly what Steiner predicted. He said, if you electrify the Earth, the people will have trouble becoming humans.
Mm.
They won't be able to think and see in a spiritual way.
Wow.
And so that's sort of what's happening. And in particular, for whatever reason, the deterioration of the DNA in the cell from an electromagnetic field exposure that you're not used to makes you look like you have a viral infection. And I mean, again, I don't have all the answers or the facts here, but my guess is we do have a problem.
Yes.
But it's the who put some shit in the water problem.
Yeah.
In this case, it's not the water, it's the electromagnetic field of the Earth, and somebody just recently put some heavy shit in our water, or our field.
Yeah, I mean, you look, as you have referenced elsewhere, at Elon Musk having approval now through the FCC of putting up 20,000 of these 5G millimeter wave emitting
Yeah,
satellites, which is only the first wave. And we know that at 60 gigahertz, the oxygen molecule, I mean, it absorbs what, 98% of the radiation.
yeah,
So, clearly okay, like I like to explain to people that their microwaves emit 2.4 gigahertz or 2.45 gigahertz waveforms. That's the Bluetooth standard. That's what Wi-Fi is on. The
yeah,
same wavelengths that we cook food by heating the water molecules are being used in these devices. So it doesn't take a big leap in logic to assume that's going to affect our constitution. 99% of the molecules by number are water, as of course we know. So, and there's this notion that biomass of the cell is really an epiphenomena, right? The cell is an electromagnetic entity, and there's an electron, and so we think about it as almost like as just emissions from the cell, but it's the other way around. Is the biomass what we consider real? These biomolecules are in a way secondary expressions of this, really, these vibrations. That's
right.
fundamentally so. And obviously the water piece that you're bringing into force, so powerful in understanding how this all connects. So we're looking at non-native EMF and looking at our bodies as water, electromagnetic. This view is profound that you're introducing. I will say that I think that you may be absolutely correct that, especially if the proxy marker for coronavirus testing with PCR is RNA levels without specificity, and these are a reflection of cell debris caused by damage,
Yeah,
exogenous damage, well then, obviously, like you're saying, this could be a patsy. This could just be, a red herring or whatever you will. When they knew very well, Wuhan being one of the most technologically advanced cities who had just rolled out their 5G network, a number of the factors are coming together, perhaps.
so yeah, it's the cell is a crystalline network of water, which is an electromagnetic sensor for the energy of the sun and Jupiter and the earth and you and me and your wife and the dog and everything.
Yes, yes.
That's the water is a living, vibrating crystal that has the flexibility to change depending on the field that it's exposed to. And then if you put a deteriorating field in there, like 2.4 gigahertz, it will form abnormal shapes, which essentially, like I said, are like getting your radio out of tune. And then you can't hear the music of Jupiter anymore.
Yes.
And so then you're out of sorts. This is sort of how Steiner described it.
Yes.
You're out of sorts, and your only recourse is to package these crystalline poison up and excrete them.
Wow.
And that's called viruses. And
Well,
so the whole thing is sort of, that's what happened. Poison the cell, particularly with a non-native, oxygen-eating electromagnetic field, poop out viruses, blame the viruses. Here we are.
amen. Well, this is a very important view, and a lot of the alternative space regarding, understanding pathogens is it's all about the forest floor metaphor. Viruses, fungi, bacteria help to accelerate the decomposition of, expended matter, debris. And I think this view is really essential in help navigating the future. And again, also helping us to see, that the emperor is naked, that there really is no pandemic as conventionally conceived, insofar as, right, it's almost medieval, really. I mean, the coronavirus medical masks are like these beak masks that these doctors in the plague used to wear, only I understand they stuff them through with garlic. So actually they were more advanced than us, potentially. But it's really remarkable that we think there are these invisible things that these priest-like, doctors with their scrying technology, their PCR tests can ascertain our fate with. It's really I'd rather go to the New Age shop and get a crystal reading because it's usually more accurate, but it's the same level of insight and awareness around what's actually happening.
Yeah, I mean, I often tell patients, I ask them, so what's up? And they say, oh, I got a virus. And I say, are you sure you didn't get hexed by a witch?
Amen.
That's what in 1600, you go to a doctor, what's the matter? Sarah, that witch down the road, she put a spell on me. Now I'm sick. Oh, okay, well, take this thing, you'll be better. Now that people come in, I have a virus. How do you know? Did you see it? No, I didn't see it. How do you know? Because Frank down the road, he got sick too.
Wow.
Seriously. Anyways.
Amazing. Wow. Well, the thing about viruses I think people need to understand is that one way of describing them is they're pieces of genetic information in search of chromosomes. They help to mediate changes in our immediate environment so that we can adapt our immunity and our physiology to changing circumstances. They are what enables our genome, epigenome to be flexible. So they're amazing actually in what they can do.
And I don't think we should also downplay the fact that it is possible in that scenario that you just said that they could also be harmful, or they could create an overly enthusiastic, as people say, cytokine storm and all this stuff. So you could have an abnormal, immunological reaction, and that could make it look bad. And there is even a communicable factor because there's this message in the world. It's like saying, this 100th monkey thing, 100 monkeys learn something. Is that an infection? I mean, sort of.
Yes.
But it's very complicated. I don't want to try to oversimplify this.
No, I appreciate that. I'd love to add to that because I think it's important for people to understand that, let's say I had a friend in Hawaii who received that text message that was issued saying an intercontinental missile was being sent to Hawaii. And it was only found out 30 minutes later or whatever that it was a mistake. But they freaked out. You can only imagine. They had 30 minutes to live. But that's essentially what we're saying when we're saying that viruses convey information, horizontally, and that some of them, like text messages that are full of disinformation or misinformation or cellular debris that might be just nonsense, can potentially confuse the cells. And so I do appreciate that qualification. And I do know that there have been governments that have attempted to weaponize certain types of viruses. So the very thing that I didn't believe was true, they've in a way created artificially. So germ theory, is valid in certain ways.
Right. You can create toxic messages.
Yes.
Sure. Okay, I think we got it.
Yeah, well, with that said, last maybe comment to the listener, sharing maybe something that they can do to maintain equanimity and health in this, historical window. If you have something maybe you could leave us with, that would be helpful.
I mean, when people, of course, ask me that, and I give them the same list I would have given them 6 months ago. Eat a biodynamic, nourishing traditions kind of diet. Drink, purified, clean, structured, mineralized water. Get rid of all your wireless devices. Use only, wired computers and no Wi-Fi. Protest against the rollout of 5G. Get outside in the sun and fresh air and ground yourself to the earth. Get enough sleep. Have good friends and good loving relations with people. Take care of your children and have fun with them if you have them, or your parents or friends. And, eat good food and do good works in the world. That's the same. Yeah. That was 6 months ago too. Those are to me, those are the best things for your immune system now, or whatever this is. Now, if you want to take vitamin C and do crystals and take mushrooms, I mean, I'm all for that. I think one should find out what works for you generally. I mean, obviously, I'm a doctor and I give people stuff, and I, even had a hand in like creating to a certain extent, certain medicines or making them available that I think clean up the cells. I think space sauna is good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't have to do anything. If all you ever do is eat crap and drink poison water and smoke and never exercise, well, you shouldn't do that because
Yeah.
that's not good for you.
Don't blame the virus then when you get sick.
Yeah, right. Don't blame the virus when you get sick. Right? Clean it up. It's about time.
Beautiful. Wow, that's so refreshing. Just very straightforward, common sense, ultimately. So, last thing is, where can people find you, follow you, stay up to date with your work?
We have a bunch of website, Dr. Cowan's Garden. I have the Human Heart, CosmicHeart.com.
Cool.
That's where I write blogs and stuff. Those are the main two.
Beautiful. Okay, well, thank you so much for your work and for your time, and hope that everyone follows you. And yeah, thank you for your service.
Great. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.